our agenda is to recognize a couple of our sports teams that won state championships, and they're here tonight. So I'd like to start by inviting the girls Alpine team coach, Ron Gifford, up to say a few words about his season, and then I'll ask him to pass out certificates, students as you're coming up, or I should say student athletes as you're coming up. If you would please shake the hands of all our board members and then stay up behind us over here. We're going to take a picture of you with the board. So Ron, I'd like to invite you up first. I think you can go to the podium where might be the best place.
Probably don't need the microphone, but thank you for inviting us and recognizing our team. You know, Alpine skiing is one of those sports where it takes all day to hold the event, but it all happens in very few seconds for every one of these athletes when they compete. And if any of you have alpine skied before, there are lots of dangers out there, ice, bumps, speed, nerves, all those things that can take a racer off their mark and not finish a course. We only get to ski 6 girls in each of the events. We have 14 girls on the team. I'm happy to say all 14 were there for the 2 days of events. Were unbelievable supporters, cheerers, scorekeepers, radio announcers up to me, keeping me posted on where we stood. And the result really is a huge team championship, and all the girls were involved top to bottom. So, with no further ado, in no particular order other than the way they were given to me, freshman Ella Delisle. Freshman Anna Erb. Freshman Emily Harper. Freshman Megan Mahoney. Freshman Ella Trefethen. Sophomore Lexi Delisle. Juniors, and we have a lot of them. Nina Georgi. So that belt bodes well for next year. Junior Katie Ide. Try to make sure I get everybody here. Junior Vita Scott. Junior Caroline the Beast Welch. Senior and Captain Clutch. You've all heard of Captain Crunch cereal. Well, we have Captain Clutch, Lily Welch. One other thing I would pass on is if you finish in the top 15 in either of the events at the state meet, slalom or giant slalom, doesn't matter. If you finish in the top 15 in one of those, you get to qualify for the selection races for the main state high school ski team that competes at the Eastern High School Championships against 110 other top high schoolers from all over the East Coast. And this year we had the most I think I've ever had in one gender. We had 4 girls qualify for that event. Dana Reynolds, who's not here tonight, Katie Ide, Caroline Welch, and Emily Harper. And Katie Ide and Caroline Welch both qualified and made the main state high school ski team. Competed this past weekend over in Attitash, New Hampshire, in the Eastern High School Championship. So congratulations to them.
Don't get direct picture taking, so if I can get the board to sit, the ones that are up front, and then ladies, if I can get you to just stand in the back over here, along with your coach, and board members on the side, if you guys want to stand.
Keep squeezing, Jessica. Turn a little sideways. Towards the middle, towards the middle. Beat it, towards the middle. There you go, that's it.
That was me.
Last couple of days were super nice skiing.
As I said, we actually had 2 teams that won state championships. So at this point, I'd like to invite Mr. Steve DeAngelis up, the coach of the Maranacook Boys Nordic Ski Team, Class B state champions. Mr. DeAngelis?
Thanks for having us. We also really appreciate that you do this. It's just a nice thing. Cross-country skiers usually leave the start where the big crowd of 10 or a dozen people are watching, and then they disappear in the woods and ski around the cold and finish covered with drool in front of about 10 or 12 people. And so it's really nice. They look way better than they normally do when people are watching them compete. But we had a tremendous, tremendous boys team, you should know. For the seniors on the team, this is their 3rd state championship in a row, which is really hard to do in an endurance sport like that. And the leadership and the makeup of the team was truly special for me. We had the 3 best skiers in the state on our team in Luke Bartol, Gabe Fine, and Carter McFedrin. And they all finished within 3 seconds of each other at the state meet, a minute and a half ahead of everybody else. They were that good. But then we had a tremendous mix of other skiers who were brand new to the sport and really had to learn in a very tough year. It was super icy out, in case you didn't notice. And they did just a great job. The team chemistry was just spectacular. And one other thing I just do want to mention before I read a few names, and that is that both our boys team and our girls team was awarded the sportsmanship banner for the 2nd year in a row. They are great again. So that really, really matters to me, and that's voted on by the other teams as well, which is a really cool thing. So I'm really proud of them for that. So here's some of our skiers here today. I'm sorry, there's a lot of our skiers who are not here. 3 of them are in Germany, didn't make it. They're on the Gap trip, and 2 of them are sick tonight. But here's the ones that are here. So freshman Seth Badeau. And freshman Zach Berg. I'm going to read their names, even if they're not here. Max Olmstead is a tuition student for us from Vienna, or from New Sharon, rather, and he's homesick, though. And Then we have Thomas Poling, who's a sophomore. Will Colvin is in Germany. Carter McFedrin is in Germany. Junior Glenn Moulton. One more. Ethan Watts is homesick also. And senior Luke Bartol. Senior Gabe Fine. Senior Tate Mendel. Tate, I didn't give you your thing. And our last senior, Bryce Trefethen, who also finished in the top 10 in both events, is also in Germany. But thank you again for having us. Appreciate it.
So we'll do the same kind of thing. We'll do pictures one more time with the boys team. So, gentlemen, if I can get you to come up right over here for us, right up behind the board. Board members on the end, please feel free to squeeze in. We've got.
That's why God created Photoshop.
So again, as these gentlemen are heading to their seats, I'd like to say congratulations to both the boys and the girls team for their state championships. There's not many people that actually get that experience. It really is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and it's a rare feat to have happen. So cherish those memories, enjoy that team feeling, and I know your coaches worked really hard with you to get to that point. And as Mr. DeAngelis said, kind of the icing on the cake for us was hearing that they won those sportsmanship banners, because that means a lot to everybody here in the Marana Cook community. So congratulations one more time. So moving on with our agenda, we do have a report from R.H.R. Smith and Company. Mr. Bill Hall is going to talk to us about the yearly audit that is performed here in RSU 38.
Evening, everyone. Feel free to give me an applause if you want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the audit down into different sections. If you have any questions while I go over it, let me know. I will point out a couple key figures while I'm doing it. Pages 1, 2, and 3 is your independent audit report. This is the most important section of the audit. This is where we form our opinion on the information. Anytime a bank or a bond company reads this document, they're usually going to start with pages 1, 2, and 3 in case there's any kind of qualified opinions or not. You have a non-qualified opinion, and that's what you want in an audit report. Pages 4 through 12 is your management discussion analysis. This is where if management, Jay or Bridget or anybody in the management wanted to put any kind of information into the document, this is where they would put it. You currently use a boilerplate that we created years ago. So technically, you're not really putting any information in it. You're just signing off that the information on the MD&A is correct. I'm going to go to page, I don't know if you have a document in front of you. I'm going to go to page 16, which is your statement C. In this statement, this actually discloses your general fund numbers at June 30th, 2018. a number that usually most school board members or financial people want to know about, and that's your fund balance at June 30, 2018. You had $813,239. Of that, $600 was assigned for your FY-19 budget, so you had an unassigned fund balance of $205,739, which is, in the state of Maine, you're actually only allowed to have 3% of your operating budget for 3 consecutive years. So I believe 3% of your operating budget's a little over $500,000, so right now you're at 205, so you are in compliance with the state. Also like to discuss your food service program. Your food service program operates as a business type fund, so it's trying to be self-sufficient. At June 30th, 2018, you had a fund balance of $202, which is good. You know, it's not negative, which a lot of school districts in the state of Maine actually do carry as a negative fund balance. Last year, you put in $120,000 that was budgeted, which obviously helped the food service program in the fiscal year 18. It did, however, lose just over $9,000 in the fiscal year. It had revenues of just under $1 million with expenses just under $1.1 million. So the $120,000 that the the voters approve every year on your budget is very important to the food service program and its operations. On page 23, statement J, it's your statement of your fiduciary funds, which you have a fiduciary fund in most of your schools in this district, and that is the student activity funds. And I always mention the student activity funds because normally in most schools, that is the funds or the money where a lot of times it has most of the common issues in school districts, you know, sales tax being paid, proper approval maybe not happening and stuff like that. At June 30th, you had $221,000 of student activity accounts. We're in our firm, we're really particular about student activity funds. We do a lot of testing on the student activity funds to make sure the ins and outflows of the student activity funds are being met with state requirements and whatnot. Because a lot of times in a lot of school districts, financial people usually don't see student activity funds, but in your district, actually, Bridget does keep a close eye on them. So page 24 to about 54 is your notes to your financial statements. And I bring this up because it's key for 2 purposes. If you ever decide to read an audit, which I probably wouldn't recommend, always start with note 1. Note 1 actually tells you, it gives you terminology on what municipal finance is. A lot of people don't understand that municipal finance is actually way backwards from normal like banking or normal for-profit financials. So if you ever do decide to read an audit, always start with note 1. It gives you all the kind of terminology you'll need. Other than that, the notes are for a better description of some of the numbers that are in your audit. So for example, if you were to look at statement A, which is net asset, not fund balance, it takes into account your long-term information. It'll have numbers in there like your long-term debt, your fixed assets and stuff like that. You can go into your notes and it'll take a 1-line number and break it down more. So if you had $10 million in fixed assets or capital assets, you could go to your note 4 and it would actually break down and tell you what part of that 10 million is land, buildings, vehicles, and whatnot. It'll help you if you have a capital plan, kind of keep your capital plan online, making sure you're replacing a fleet or making sure your buildings are up to, you know, specifications and whatnot. Other notes that would be in there would be long-term debt. Also in there would be your retirement information. You know, a lot of schools and probably almost every school in the state of Maine belongs to Vistas, not Vistas, that's Vermont. Maine PERS. So I believe every teacher, unless they're semi-retired, usually puts money into the Maine PERS program. It's a huge program in the state of Maine, and I'd say about 4 years ago, GASB, which is Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which governs us, governs municipal accounting, set some standards that we have to disclose more information on retirement. So it went from about 2 pages about 5 years ago. Now it's like up to 12 pages because the information we have to disclose has to talk about unfunded liability and whatnot. Not unfunded by the school district, but unfunded at the pension plan as a whole. I'd like to also talk about page 54, I think it is, 56, which is your budget to actual. Your revenues were budgeted at 17.212 as your expenses were. You actually received $247,000 above what you budgeted. Most of that was in tuition at $159,000. You also received a little bit of more in state funding, about $30,000, and your transportation, you came in about $20,000 higher. For your expenses, you saved about $323,000 out of $17 million. That's really good. That's, less than 2%. In the budget categories of student and staff support, system administration, school administration, and transportation, those were your overspent categories, and I'm assuming Bridget must have, yeah, she did already, brought that to the board to make sure you transfer from one article to another. According to state statutes, you actually, if you overspend any of your articles, so every year you guys vote on articles, either it's usually 1 through 11 or 2 through 12, if the school district overspends any of those articles, the school board is to make a motion to transfer from one article to another. Following that, you got your Department of Operations. So when you look at that Schedule 1 that we just talked about, the budget piece, the Department of Operations actually takes those articles and breaks it down. So if you wanted to look and see exactly why any of those articles overspent, you can look in the Department of Operations and it'll break it down further on why those articles were overspent. Following that is the breakdown of your special revenues and permanent funds. A lot of your special revenues are your federal and state grants that you get, Title I, local entitlement, stuff like that. So we have to track those separately from the general fund required by federal government. So we report there a balance sheet and a revenue expenses for each one of your grants. And then following the special revenues is your permanent funds, which are mostly all of your scholarships and whatnot. For this school district, you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 15 or so scholarships and whatnot. So, that's not the largest I've ever seen. It's pretty probably average, through school districts to have that many scholarships. After that is just some fixed asset information. And then the last pages of this document, we have to put in here because we have to do a single federal audit. When you spend $750,000 of federal money, we actually have to dive into some of that federal spending and make sure you're spending it on what you're supposed to. For FY-18, I believe, again, this was almost a year ago, I don't believe there was any concerns that we had with any of the financial information that was presented to us from Bridget or her finance committee, financial individuals, Mandy. I believe she got a pretty good audit, pretty clean audit. I think it only took us 4 days, I think, to get the field work done. And that's about my presentation. Do you have any questions? So like I said, I remember, it might have been more than 4 or 5 years ago that you used to have a negative fund balance in your general fund when all that accrued compensated absences stuff came up and you had to not accrued payroll. So you've come a long way in that time and actually have a nice solid fund balance that you're using to offset your budget to make sure your fluctuation in taxes aren't EKG look. So, the RSU 38 finance is really good right now. You have about a $300,000 play in your unassigned fund balance, for the 3%, so there's, I would say your grade overall in your finance is probably right around a B+, A- currently. Unfortunately, that could turn very quickly, but over the last few years, you've had a pretty good financial position. Any questions? I like it short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Citizen comments. None. Joint meeting, review of the fiscal year 20 budget.
So I know, just very quickly, I know we have name tags in front of everyone, but if you feel like, is everyone okay with that, or would you like formal introductions? I'm going to ask the group.
I don't think they know each other.
All right, we won't do formal introductions because we've got name tags in front of us. We like to invite you in so that we can have a conversation about where we are with the budget. So before we get too far along, I'm going to be very honest with you and say, this is my first time going through a budget. So I am taking steps very kind of slowly and methodically and trying to learn as much as I can along the way. So I know in the past things have moved a little quicker, and I apologize for my slowness at this time, but I do need to learn. So please bear with me as we're kind of working our way through the entire process here. So what you have in front of you, I believe everyone picked up a first draft. The first page is what the first draft looks like, and it's broken up by each elementary school, middle school, high school, and then of course district-wide, what it looks like along with our superintendent, buildings and facilities, along with the transportation also. So the grand total at the bottom, this is totally like, we have not cut anything yet. This is like first draft. So I want to be very clear about that. We have, and I'll explain more as we get through, but it's very much a first draft. So if you're looking at the grand total line going all the way across the bottom, the second to last column, that is FY-20 versus FY-19, that very last one, we're about $1,572,000 over what we were looking at last year. Again, that's a first draft. We haven't cut anything out at this point. So having said that to you, if you flip to the very next page, those are the current requests that are kind of on the table from the administrators and directors of the district. And you can see what each one is. I'm not going to read that to you for obvious reasons, but you can see what the requests are, and you can see what the cost would be. So the total budget increases, notice there it says 1.7 million, a little over 1.7, but if you go into the back side of that page, there are some budget decreases that are kind of happening, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of happening naturally because of things that are changing or coming off. So you can see some of the budget decreases that are happening naturally in the course of our budget going from this year into next year. So there's about $169,000 worth of decreases that are happening naturally. So that 1.572 matches what you saw on the very first page under the grand total. So hopefully that makes sense so far. And if I'm going too fast, please feel free to slow me down. Then as you go to the third page, what we're looking at here is prioritizing some of those requests so that we can begin the process of whittling the budget down from the 1.5 million over that's there. You'll notice some of it's in yellow because we're having discussions about if we don't get it this year, would we want to carry it forward into next year, or I should say the following year, the 2021 year, and then I expect to have more conversations with some of those requests actually go out into the 2021, 2022 year. So we're kind of trying to make sure things don't fall off as we're moving forward, but we also know that we do have to make cuts. So we've kind of prioritized. The two biggest pieces at this point are the positions. That's what the top part is. And then the bottom part, which again is one of the biggest pieces of our budget also, is the maintenance budget. And I know we've got a bond that passed through, but there's, as you can see, there's other work that needs to happen besides just what's happening with the bond around kind of yearly maintenance around our buildings as you go forward. So that's kind of where we are right now. So I'd like to, at this point, unless Dr. Carr, if there's anything you want to add or anyone from the board wants to add before we get into question answers.
So the high school, you took the keyless entry off, and you have a security problem, people coming in this building.
Yes.
Setting the alarm off all the
Yes.
time.
Yep.
And you can't identify them. To me, that isn't cool.
Yeah.
that keyless entry is gonna stop that. That needs to go in year one.
And I just did based on my
Right.
discussion with
I
Sean
understand it.
Drinkwater, so.
But I think that's a safety
Yeah.
problem, because we have people walking in this school all the time, and we have no idea who they are. That is a major safety problem.
I have a couple questions.
Of course.
So we just passed a bond in the district in January.
Right.
And we passed the bond, I would call it in quotes because it was a very low percentage turnout. And so I think that probably serves as sort of a notice to be very careful with the rest of the budget because you have a fairly large expense that received very narrow support when passing. So that's a concern. And I've heard that concern on the street, so I'm passing that along. I do have a couple of questions when I drill down into the maintenance projects. And the purpose of my question is not to second guess you, but it's to ask why, for example, a $100,000 item for bleachers or a near $100,000 item for a roof on, I assume that's the middle school, why those weren't rolled into the bond.
That's a really good question. I'll be very honest from where I stand. When I first came in and we started working on the bond and I kind of had to hit the ground running, those two things weren't even brought to my attention until after the bond had quote-unquote passed. I don't know, Bridget, if you want to add something, you have more history?
We were trying to make sure, when we looked at the bond and we first went through, and Betty was on the committee too, and so was Gary. When we first went through the list of priorities from Oak Point, the architect who did our needs assessment, we actually came up with over $7 million worth of things that needed to be done. And we felt that that was a bond too large for our communities to be able to support. And so we backed off some of the things that we thought that we could try to get into a regular budget. Looking at, what we had done in the past in a yearly basis. I apologize for my voice. So we backed off some of those projects because we wanted to make sure we got the really big ones. I mean, we have two projects. One's $1.5 million and the other one's $2 million. And then we have a couple that are $700,000 or $800,000. So we really tried to get the biggest projects done with the bond. And some of these other items that were under $100,000, we decided we could try to fit them in during a regular budget.
So again, I'm coming back to those two items in particular. So on the municipal side, our budgets, sometimes we do multi-year savings rather than bonding on something where we'll set aside $25,000 a year towards something, and we might in the third year, for example, up that to $50,000 in order to do the project. So my question, particularly, I don't know about the bleachers, whether that's a comfort issue, a capacity issue, or a danger issue, but I would ask you to think about whether that's a candidate for that. And I know roofs can be very fickle, so I helped develop the middle school and the building for that and the bond for that and so on and so forth. That's when I served on the school board. So I'm asking about that. I'm going back quite a few years now. What's with the roof?
So the roof in the middle school, the rubber in between the joints is deteriorated. So that rubber has to be replaced on the roof. So it's just a repair job.
Bruce, it's called a restore.
Yep.
And so, and that's where they just go in and they redo the seams on the rubber, and it's a normal process that gets done.
Is it is there leakage?
Not at this time.
So is there a multi-stage
There's-
approach to that work versus a full one-stage approach? I'm just kind of asking questions that I would ask on the municipal side. For
Right.
example, we're probably going to go to bond on a fire department expansion this year. And so we ask these kinds of questions all the time.
Yeah, I think, you know, we get our recommendations from G&E Roofing. You know, they oversee our roofs, and so they're the ones who give us recommendations, and they're saying it's due up. But I'm sure it's a conversation that Jay could actually have with the maintenance director.
Yeah, there is no, I did talk to Sean a little bit about that. There is no leakage now. Again, he's relying on the recommendation from the roofing company, saying that now's the time to do it. You could put it off, but you're also kind of kicking the can down the road, and there could be some leakage. So it's one of those things that you kind of depend on what the experts are telling you.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that we go to the point of deterioration.
Yeah.
But again, it's whether you can do some things in phased work rather than all at once.
Yeah, I'll just, so I will talk to Sean more about that. I apologize, he is not here tonight because he had a family emergency. He left earlier in the day, and I told him he had to go take care of his family. So I apologize that he's not here to help with some of these questions, but we can make sure we get some of those. I'll go back to the bleachers for just a second. The bleachers that we have are original bleachers to this building. They were here when the school was built. They've had a couple of, they're not ADA compliant by any stretch of the imagination. However, we are grandfathered, so there has been work done in the past to make them kind of still serve what they're supposed to be doing. However, this past season, with the kind of the success of our basketball teams, the increase in attendance, we've had a lot. My office got a lot of calls from elderly people who talked about the difficulty they had being able to navigate those bleachers and how afraid they were to actually climb the bleachers. And we've talked about what could we do short term to kind of help them out, but we are at that point where we kind of have to look at, it's a community, we use it as a community building, and we want people to be able to come in, and we don't want people to be afraid of our bleachers, so that's kind of where that's coming from. We are trying to look at, do we have to make that purchase all at one time, like you asked, and how that would work out. So that's also like we're in the talking phases of, can we bring that down or spread that out in some way so it doesn't get hit all in one year?
Yeah, or do a section at a time.
Right.
Or a more compliant or easily
Right.
accessible section at a time.
Yeah, no, it's knowing how old they are. We had a company that came in to look at them, and they were actually really surprised at how old our bleachers were and that they were still here. So it's a work in progress.
I have more questions, but I don't want to take up other people's time if they want to ask questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Adam?
Hi, Aaron.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. My question is pretty simple. The bond in the debt service that we just passed, is that built into this?
Yes, it is. I'll let Bridget do that.
The first interest payment is built into this budget.
Okay.
On the
And
bottom.
where would that show up on this?
On the bottom, right on the bottom.
Actually, if you go to the second page, Aaron.
Well,
No,
but in
Oh, sorry. Yep, go ahead.
in the budget itself, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line from the bottom, it says 900 district-wide. It's in that line. It's up 246,000, and 90,000 of that is the bond interest payment.
Thank you.
And following up for Aaron, what is the year 2 on that? Is that a big jump?
It is.
That's where we
That-
really see
That
the
will be our
effect of the
biggest
bond.
year, year 2.
And then you retire another bond in year 3, is that? How does your
okay.
bonding capacity work?
Sorry. Next year will be our last year on our Siemens energy retrofit, so that's about 128,000. So that will be the last year payment on that, so that will go off the same year that our largest payment goes on. The year after that, the middle school debt goes off. So there is 1 year where we still have the middle school debt, and we have the bond, the new bond debt, and that's in 2021.
And do you have figures for those?
Well, I gave estimated figures for those at the, when we did the hearings, the public hearings on the bond. I don't have them in my budget work here. Yeah, okay. So in this current year, we've got $60,000 going off, which was what we had budgeted for the architect to do some of their work, and so we have $90,000 going on for the first interest payment. Next year, in 2021, we have $128,000 going off, but we'll have $562,000. And these are estimates. We're not going out to bond until November. We're doing a fall issue. That'll be $562,000 going on. The year after that, excuse me, we have a net amount of $113,900 going off. Now the budget will actually go down more than that because the middle school's principal amount is $425,000, but 81% of that is covered by state money. So even though the budget will go down $425,000, the state money will go down also. So it's a net amount of $113,000. And the payment that year will be $554,000. And the year after that, we have the Siemens Phase 2 energy retrofit project going off. That's another $49,000. And the bond payment will be $545,000. And the year after that, we have the high school renovations, when they expanded the high school and did a lot of renovations, going off, and that's $101,000 going off. And the bond payment that year will be $536,000.
Thank you.
So regarding the bond issue, that means we're not going to start spending any of that money for another year? It seemed
No,
like some of those projects were more urgent.
No, those projects will be done this summer. We've gone out for a bond anticipation note.
Okay.
And so the bulk of, almost all the work will be done this summer on
Right.
the bond. And then the actual bond will be used to reimburse the bond anticipation note.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. By the way, congratulations on your audit.
Oh, thank you.
And can you just remind us how long the bond is that we just passed for the repair projects?
Yep, that's a 15-year bond.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to pick up on something that Gary mentioned. So there was a line item for keyless entry. I assume you mean like a card key
Yes.
system or whatever. Maybe relating to that, is the line item for resource officer, is that like a armed guard? Or what is
Yeah,
that?
that's something that the high school and middle school has done some work around, and it is a school resource officer, and it's actually contracted through the sheriff's department. So it's actually a trained law enforcement officer that comes here and does.
Many of us
here.
don't like that idea. I would encourage you to use some technology first, try to keep the place a little bit more secure. It's pretty simple to allow the doors to unlock from 8 to 9, lock again, maybe have a little video doorbell, ring doorbell, I don't care what. And then, if there's an event, you can auto unlock them. But I think a lot of us feel like if you start with the armed guard, once you put any new thing in, you can never get rid of it. So some of us think that's overkill, and that would be an easy $69,000 to move from priority 2 down to priority 6.
Yes, no, I agree, because once you start criminalizing normal teenage behavior, I think that's not someplace that we want to go. And as Paul said, once you bring something here, nothing goes away, because I haven't seen any cuts in your budget here. Some things that happen naturally, but none of the positions that you guys have put in over the last, 3 years that I was here, and then the last couple, they're still here. And you're adding even more. I find that a little bit upsetting, because when you came to talk to us about the bond, there was I thought and understanding that this year's budget was going to be cognizant of the fact that you're putting $100 extra tax burden on each of our taxpayers, and would try to show a little bit of discretion here when you were deciding what you had to have this year.
It'd actually be 150 from Mount Vernon.
Right, even more, yes.
So just remember, these are just first initials. We haven't cut anything out yet. So these are just discussion items at this point. They're not like set in stone.
Yes, no, absolutely. Can I just say, though, that when I read your minutes, there was a question, I think, in the last minutes about how much you were going to cut, and there was no number that was put forward. And I would suggest that you guys want to come up with a number, and a pretty, one that's like 1, 2, as opposed to 8 or 9 that you have here.
Can I speak to the resource officer as well? Because, and then Catherine, would you like to speak first?
Nope.
Okay. I voted against the resource officer here many years ago, and it was a very difficult decision. There were a lot of things happening in the news that made you consider it. As a matter of fact, we had to do a weighted vote for that particular issue. One of the things that concerned me at the time, too, beyond the resource officer, is generally it's not just an FTE. There's other peripheral items that come along with that you have to supply. And I'd like to know the nature of the contract a little bit. Does it include a vehicle, for example, or is that something that's provided by the Sheriff's Department, or we subsidize? Same thing for training. I mean, other equipment, whether it's anything from a gun to restraint items or so forth, or I don't know if you're thinking about canine as well. I'm not sure what all of that might be, but I do know that that can be a pretty complicated piece. And as you look at a resource officer, I would ask a lot of hard questions around what does it require to put that man or woman into the schools? And is it just for these two, just for this campus?
That we were looking at like an 80-20 split between 80% time here and 20% at the middle school.
So the idea is not necessarily to have a full-time quote-unquote guard.
Right.
Are there
But he's always here.
possibilities
But
to
he's
work
always
with other communities?
Say that again, I'm
Are
sorry.
there possibilities to work with other communities?
That's a good question. That's something we should certainly look into.
Thank you, Bruce. I can be loud.
I know you can.
A lot of people here know that. So I'm going to put on my teacher hat and then my community hat. From a veteran teacher standpoint, having a resource officer is probably one of the better decisions a school district can make. Resource officers are not necessarily here for protection, but they're here to help students understand laws, how they behave with each other. They help to resolve a lot of conflicts that students have throughout the day. They're the first person who deals with them when they have problems, whether they're problems that come from school or the ticket they got on the way to school, or a harassment charge. In my school district, we've had an officer on campus for probably 15 years. It initially started with a grant. I don't know if those are still available. I think the first time we got it, it was a 4-year grant, and the school district had to agree to the 5th year. Now it's split between, it's a regular Farmington Police Department employee. The percentage of time that they spend in the school, which is full school day time, I think it's 7 hours a day. They make up the rest of their full-time status through their regular department time, so the school isn't subsidizing any other time. They do carry a weapon. That's not an issue. For most kids, it makes them respect the law more, understand the law more. There's a lot of education that goes on. There are a lot of issues kids have, and there's response right there. It really helps, and I would suggest if the board's looking at a resource officer to really dig in and find out what the benefits are. It's not nearly as scary as some people think it will be. It's really very comforting to a lot of people. I know what the other issues are. So my community standpoint would be, see if there's some way you can get some funding for that. Because I know there are programs out there still that will help with that. And they may be multi-year, and that's okay. If it's all right, I have some other questions. Anybody object? Okay, so I did a quick tally of the 3 columns and got 662,000 for the first year, 221 in the second year, and 205 in the third year. But the total increase listed on the first page is 1.572, so there's $484,000 that isn't accounted for in those 3 columns. Can you tell me where that is?
Salary and benefits for current staff.
Okay, so it's all salary. Salary and benefit. Okay, and that is negotiated through what time period?
Yeah, so we're actually in teacher contract negotiations right now, going into next year, so that's a big unknown for us right now. We had to put some money in the budget, so we put in enough to negotiate in good faith with them, but we have not settled the contract yet. We started in the negotiation process, I believe in February, I want to say, right? And we're meeting either almost weekly or every other week right now, so we are trying to get, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job with that, but there's still work to be done with that, so.
Okay. And you put in a 10% increase for, as a placeholder for health insurance. Has it been that in past years? I think we usually do that, but it doesn't usually come in at that much.
It hasn't in the past. I think our highest has been 8%. We are waiting. We should know in the next week or two the range, but then they look at your specific experience. And we usually do know the exact number before the budget is passed. It's usually the first week of April when we get the final number, and I have been able to make adjustments to the budget in that time.
Okay. So there have been a couple changes recently. The school funding numbers came out a weekish ago, and I noticed that Maranacook is due to receive more subsidy. Has that already been put into this draft?
The subsidy is the revenue side of the budget. It's not the expenditure side. They're built the same, and they're built separately, and they have to total the same amount. But it doesn't actually, you don't build the increase into the expenditure side. And we'll be doing, hopefully by next week, we'll have the revenue, a draft of the revenue out.
Okay. I know this is just from my work as a select board member and as a budget committee member from the past. It's kind of scary when people see $1.6 million essentially. And if you have some numbers that you can say, well, it looks like our subsidy is going to be increasing by $200,000 or whatever it is, that makes that number a little bit easier to react to. Whereas I think when it comes out ahead of any revenue side, people tend to overreact. And I would probably say that everyone on this side of the table is sitting there now because we don't have any kind of increases like these pending in our towns because we know how hard they've been hit. It's not just your fault. I mean, we understand revenue sharing has been a huge hit to the towns, but the schools need to understand that too when you're asking all the towns for money, that we're down $200,000 just in Reedfield every year from not having our state mandated revenue sharing being paid. And it's very hard if you're coming up with numbers of, where did I write them down? I did it somewhere.
I would just, while she's looking for that, echo that concern. I mean, I did expect to see revenue numbers tonight as well.
Yeah.
Because again, that allows us to show what the balancing act you are working with is.
Yeah. And I'll own that again. That's me working very methodically and slowly, and I sincerely apologize that that's not ready tonight, but we'll make sure you have that. by the next board meeting, we'll be able to share it, and we can make sure you guys have it Thursday morning if necessary. And I apologize, that's just me going very slowly and methodically. And Catherine, just to answer your question, with the ED 279, we're looking tentatively, and keep in mind, those reports are always tentative. It's the first look from the state has given us as to what we're looking at. We're basically looking at about $150,000. We're going to get more from the state. So, and that kind of matches what Governor Mills has said she was looking to do. In the past, it's been or last year, I should say, because that's really all I know at this point. Last year, it was a 69% came from the towns, and 69% came from the towns, and 31 came from the state. So it's about a 1% change there going forward. So I said that wrong. Last year, it was 70% from the town and about 30 from the state. And this year, we're looking at 69 from the state, and no, I did it backwards again. That's why I have Bridget here, you guys.
And then
So 29 from is what the town share would be. So I apologize if I messed up those numbers all up.
You're doing great. And then my last point, the amount that came out, does that include the proposed change to the amount of districts paying into the retirement system? Or is that an additional thing that came up in the last weekish?
I don't know what you mean by every 2 years since we've had to do a portion of the match, every 2 years it has gone up. And I have built in the increase for next year, but I know there's something proposed about putting it back on the state again.
Right.
But I still have it built in.
I think it passed, but I'm not, I just don't have the numbers on the top of my head. But it was the state shifting the burden of, part of the burden of the retirement benefit, not the amount that's withdrawn from salaries, but your retired people from your district. And the state has talked about shifting that backwards so that it would go into the state fund and the state at large would fund it instead of each district.
Right. If it's the amount that employees have to match right now, or employers have to match right now,
That's not the money.
that's
I'm
not
talking
it. So that's all done through federal money then. It's not an amount that we build into the regular budget. If it's the retirement match, that's something different.
It's not the match. It's that a couple years ago, if anyone else here knows about this, help me out.
I'm somewhat familiar with
The
it.
retirement benefit for those who have retired from RSU 38 used to be paid entirely out of the state retirement fund. And the state shifted part of that burden to the districts. Now they're talking about reversing that, which means there would be less that we would pay out.
And so, I guess the thing to chase down would be, how is that, what is the mechanism on that? Is it just put through the formula, for example?
Okay.
That's probably what you need to find out.
I mean, the only two things we pay to retirement is the match on current employees, and in the current year, it's 3.97%. Next year, I budgeted it in at 4.16. But I know there is legislation to roll that back to the state again.
I think they threw it into EPS.
And they might
That's
have,
where
I mean,
it's going to come out
it is part of the formula. But there is also another amount that we pay, but it's only paid when we use federal funds. But I think part of it has to do with retirees. But it's only paid out of federal grant monies. It's part of the match we have to do for federal grant monies, which is a lot higher. It's like 19%. Yeah, but we only pay that when we use federal money. But part of that has to do with retirees.
If I find more out and it doesn't match with that, I'll email you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
I'm done.
It's kind of a general comment. It probably wasn't lost on you, Jay, and the board that Mount Vernon was the only town that voted down the bond. And I don't think it was so much because we didn't believe in the urgency of some of the projects, but because of state funding formula, Mount Vernon, as you may know, pays about, almost $4,000 more per student to educate than Reedfield students. So I don't want to express any personal opinion, this isn't, but there is grumbling about whether or not we should go the way of Fayette and pay tuition and lose our 3 seats at the board, and save $4,000 a student. I'm not looking for an answer, but I'm just saying that is one of the challenges, perhaps more unique in Mount Vernon than the other 3 towns, but personally, I know it's a lot of work, and I'm not looking to do that work, to withdraw, because it's a multi-year thing and it's a lot of administrative headaches. But, people talk about it, and it's not the fault, if you will, of this board or any administration, and I won't ask Bridget to explain the state funding formula, but it is a thing, though, it's a challenge, so.
So Wayne has the same comment, because we're in the same boat you are.
So I'm not looking for an answer, but it is a challenge. So, when we look at a $15 million bond and then another $1.6 million this year over last, I realize we're going to whittle down, one would hope, but I don't know what to tell people, honestly. We're not going to be able to do this much longer. I'm a fan of the school, trust me. I got 3 grandchildren that are in this room every day, and I had 3 kids graduate here, so I'm a big fan of what happens here, the administration, the teachers, and everybody's effort as volunteers, but it's a big challenge for us on the tax side.
Yeah, I want to echo that to some degree. And again, I'm extremely supportive of the schools, and I believe that they add an attractive element to our communities, which, well, I relocated here because I shopped schools. That's why I live in Reedfield, and I wanted to be here, and I wanted to be in the Marana-Cook system. I used to live in Windsor, where everything was a pencil argument on every single little item. So we like this investment. I think, however, it's very important when you're making a large step forward in your facilities and everything, that you figure out a pathway, if you will, and this talks about something that I've spoken at this podium a couple times about, which is what is the long-term vision with your elementary schools, for example. But it would be very helpful to see a pathway, and a pathway that runs through next year, I have to say, and in the following year with that big bond payment that continues to earn the support of citizens, and for them to see the value that Marana-Cook, which I believe very strongly, offers to the community. So I'm not one that stands up here and argues for leanness, but I guess this year I would say that you want to be very judicious.
People are past your bond, but we still have to get your budget passed.
Yep.
So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, they're out there talking about, gee, how much more can this go up? So you want to be as lean as you can be, because the residents are feeling it.
I think I'd have one request for you, Jay. I've looked at the strategic plan, which is, I think it's mostly about education, right? It's not necessarily encompassing other items that a business would have, for example, but it would be nice to pick up on what Bruce mentioned, to see some kind of a vision over the next, say, 10 years, beyond just the mandated education bits in the strategic plan. But and I knew you were too new to answer these questions when you first started, and we were talking about elementary schools this past fall. But people wonder, and I know there's some new ideas floating around, but that was one of the hesitations in the bond issue for Mount Vernon residents, whether or not we wanted to pay for millions of dollars improvements in some of the schools that may or may not be there as schools for 15 years. So I'm not recommending one thing or another, but to see some kind of a vision or strategic plan that would include, do we build one big elementary school and bring all the kids to it? Do we move, whatever, all the second graders? Yeah, I don't care what, but some kind of vision that people can look at as they look at these investments in the infrastructure.
And And I'm a big fan of doing that. And financially, I know once you get beyond 3 years, you can't really predict the future, but you can have a vision and an aspiration. And I really think it is important when you have a six, well, if you want to count the bus garage and the other building down the road, and eight different buildings and so forth that you're maintaining. I do think you need to build a vision for that. I would urge you, as you do that, to not do it as a board, but to do it with board representation, to do it with teacher representation, administration representation, parental representation, municipal, and any other people that you can bring in. You would obviously need to be pretty lean because you can't have a committee of 100 working on something, but obviously I think some probably facilitated strong planning commitment that would involve all of those elements is absolutely required.
We as a board have already discussed that, and we want to put together that kind of a committee to start looking. Probably it won't get started until next year with all the other things that we have on our plate, but we've already talked about that.
I'm really glad to hear that. And again, I would advocate as much as possible that it's a reflection of the community and not just, you really need parents and teachers and for the head, you know, put some facilities people on it too, you know.
Yeah. We have the notes from 2011.
Yep.
And Jay has looked over those really carefully. So that's the first place to start with what people thought back then. And there were how many different plans?
There were 14 different.
14 different proposals for restructuring the elementary schools. We have seriously talked about, especially at the facilities committee, and when we went to bond, we were looking specifically at those projects that were absolutely needed to keep the schools open for the time period that it will probably take to get a new, if we were to go the route of a new elementary school, one facility, how long that would take. And with school funding of new buildings and new projects, to get on the list and get ourselves up to the position, it's probably going to take 15 to 20 years. So we need those buildings to be in good shape now and for the next 15 years or more, so that we can, so we have a good place to educate our students now.
Well, again, going back to constructing the middle school, we were on a wait list then. Money was a little bit looser at that point, so we were fortunate that you didn't sit there for that many years. So I guess if you're talking that many years, I would say hit the ground running as soon as you can.
Yeah.
Because the other thing too is you present budgets and so on and so forth, you can co-present it with the long-range plan. This is where we are headed.
Yeah.
This is what this budget helps build the support and base for.
Right.
And that keeps you, I think, in focus. And, you know, I have no idea. I mean, I could dream up different scenarios for the elementary schools. But, you know, it's not necessarily affecting students that are sitting in school today. And so I think that's what you need to talk about and where and how you get there.
So one thing we did do, Bruce, is we already did a population study, so, and that came back that we will only increase 20 students over 20 years.
Now, whether that's true or not,
Right, but
but
that's
that's a
population.
projected
Yeah.
study, that's an educated guess.
Yeah, and I mean, well, we've seen more building in our town recently than we have in a number of years. So, I mean, that could change with 2 or 3 houses almost. And the student count is an important part, Gary. However, it's as the buildings age out, too. Someplace that kind of crosses.
I do. It's more or less a comment. I would encourage you all to, that this 8.78% increase is really get that down below the 5% range, if that's possible. I know a couple of years ago, or actually, was it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had 2 9% increases over a period of time, year after year. And then last year, you guys did really good. I think you got us down to 4%. But I just did the math quickly, and for Wayne, the 8.8% is basically 1 mil on our mill rate. And I just cringe at bringing that forward to the voters and saying, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to do, it's going to, a mill with the bond and everything. And I just see that as a real problem. And I know that the town, my budget committee is very conservative. Gary knows, he was on it. And they will be asking me to cut the town operation. And that is frustrating as a manager because we have our own priorities and our own goals. And we have our own levels and needs, needs. And I think that, having to constantly be in the position that the town is in, I think many times is cut to pay for the school. Large increases becomes frustrating because we're putting off our needs and our dreams too, so.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
If I could just, how do you hear me? I'm the newbie, I know less about this than anyone around here, but I do look at for a living, and when I look at these numbers, acknowledging the district-wide figure here contains debt service and some things that are necessary, and that a lot of it is not controllable, it's specified by this rule or that rule. That's the second biggest building in the whole system, the district-wide. Even if you take out the debt service and all the rest of that, that's properly district-wide. So I'm saying to myself, people are talking about saving money by closing schools when the bureaucracy is really bigger than any of the other schools other than the school we're in now. And I'm not meaning to just rail against bureaucracy, because I know you need people, you need staff, you need to get things done. But when we have a number that jumps right out at you like that, and you're saying, this is bigger than any of the other schools, maybe we need to take a hard look at whether there's some room in there for getting more efficient or for some trimming, especially with the crunch that we're facing. So I don't know the answer to that, but I really would like to see the board start thinking hard about that. Are there places, and I think the citizens and taxpayers and other municipal officials would feel comforted if they knew that some careful, hard look had been taken at this. I remember I lived in state government through the Governor Longley days, where there was just, it seemed every 3 to 6 months, it was take another 5% out, take another 5% out. And I used to think, well, any monkey can cut a budget. You just play with numbers, but you have to, the best way to do this is to get more efficient. That's the way to cut a budget. And I'm not sure how to do that, because like I say, I'm a newbie. I don't know what people do or what happens in this building in the back office, but I'd just like to get it on record that that's a very big number for taking care of the whole system. The world has changed. A lot of things we hear have, they're able to get more done with the same number of people. And if you could figure a path toward, in 6, 8, 12 months, toward taking a very hard look at that, I think it would be a very good move.
Could I just say one quick thing? I don't want to come across as anti-education. I value what you all do. That's not what I'm saying about that. I just wanted to put out there that we have needs, and I just want you to be aware of that. We got roads and aging buildings and things like that that need help.
Yeah, so if I could, I do recognize you have a lot of work to do on the budget, and I appreciate the numbers that are presented so far. It was a bit of a shock, honestly, that 8.78, and I'm very relieved that we have revenue coming in, we have revenue numbers, that the revenue gods will be, doing the same to you as they've done to us, more money from the state. It's been a wonderful thing for us this year with our budget. So I'm very pleased that that's going to be happening, and you're going to be working to bring all this into balance. I did do the numbers as Aaron did, and we're looking at if this 8.78 holds, which it won't, but if it does, we'd be looking at a 1 mil increase for the town of Reedfield. So again, quite an impact. So definitely understand that you'll be diminishing that, getting that down, paring it down. However you can, including with the use of revenues. I will echo some of the other statements that have been made about looking at those requests, making those prioritizations, getting it down, because I'm, I guess, less worried about this fiscal year, 20, than I am about 21, because I know that if we're looking at $400,000 in increases, administration or salary and benefits, this year we'll be looking at something similar likely next year. In addition to that bond payment, and that's another 400,000, or maybe it's 300. I didn't quite get the.
Oh, it's 4 plus.
It's 4 plus. Okay, so after you account for the retirement of debt, and so that debt horizon really is very important. And I'm pleased to see that you continue FY-21, 22, 23, 24 retiring debt, and the payments for the infrastructure bond that you're putting will be diminishing as well. So there seems to be some balance there, but next year, FY-21 does concern me. I would hope that we're able to harden, if we can, to some extent, in preparation for that, what likely will be a 6, 7, 8% increase if things continue the way they are in FY-21. And so that twofer that people have been talking about is what I see as a concern. Again, we have revenue coming in this year. It'll probably come in at a similar level next year, but there's just a lot of work to do, and good luck working through this and pulling things down and making those tough decisions that you have to make. So thank you.
I have a question about enrollment. Betty's 1 student per year kind of over 20 years. That's interesting. But do you have enrollment projections for next year? Are they up, down, even?
Yeah, it's about even going into next year. We're looking at what we obviously have pre-K registrations, which don't happen until May, but we've started to kind of put feelers out, and I know some of the town offices have actually helped us with that. But it's looking like it should be our enrollment will stay about static going into next year.
Because you've added a couple of, right.
Oh, sorry, I just didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Yep.
So there's the addition of some teaching staff, and then the other isn't really teaching staff, but support staff. Is that because we have an influx of students, say, in one building, and there isn't enough staff to cover it there? Can staff be switched rather than expanded?
Yeah. Like for example, in the one in Manchester, it's a bubble class that's moving through. So one's coming in, one's going out. So that's where it's coming through, and I don't know, I'm going to be very honest in saying I don't know the numbers. I have something there, but I know we need to have our kiddos with someone, and that's where it's coming in Manchester. I don't know if you want to add to that.
In Manchester, their 5th grade class is a single teacher right now. They've only got 2 grades that are single teachers. All the rest of their classes are double. So they've got a single going out, but they'll have a double coming in. They'll have too many kids for a single teacher. And so they need to increase by 1 teacher there in Manchester.
Okay. And so those are some of the things that might be able to be met with efficiencies, as Lloyd was saying, if we had more consolidated buildings. And I think an important thing in a strategic plan, and to start talking about as soon as possible, this year, even if it was possible, is you're looking at giving us a $0.25 increase over the next 15 years for the improvement bond, approximately $100,000 per town, just being very rough with it.
That's correct.
And then we know that salaries go up, and that's okay, and hopefully school funding will go up slightly also, so there should be some balance there. But it's not an endless well, and we can't do that. And so I think one important thing to put out to people is we don't want to see change in our own towns because we want to keep our own elementary school. But we also don't want to pay for keeping those elementary schools running. And so there has to be a choice that's made. And that has to be talked about, and it has to be talked about seriously, because as this money keeps coming up, we have people who can't afford to live where they're living. And I don't think it's fair to keep running multiple buildings that are underutilized, possibly, I don't know that for certain, and ask people to keep paying for that when they can't pay for their own homes. The economy has been getting better. Hopefully it will continue to do that and stay strong, and you have a lot of support in all 4 communities for education. And it's been a number of years since there was a very close school vote, and I don't want to see this year be one. So I just encourage you, as others have said, if you can bring this down and spread it out over more years, it's more likely to have a budget that will be well received and passed, rather than having a budget fight constantly. I work in a district where we've been doing that for the last 3 years. It's not a fun process. It'll be a whole lot easier to make it smaller now and have it pass than to do this 3 or 4 times. Because you're going to cut something anyway. So that, I'm done. And I really appreciate you having us, Jay. And if it's better next year, I don't think the timing particularly matters to any of us because we all have our town meetings in June. I personally would rather come to a meeting after you have some of the income numbers. And it's okay that you didn't have them tonight, but you know, if that means that we do it a week or 2 later next year, I think that would be more informative for you as well as for us. So.
That's a great comment. And again, I have to own that. I've been moving very slowly just because I've had to learn it. So, but thank you for saying that. I will be much more on top of it going into next year for sure.
I appreciate you being slower and more concerned than just flying through and relying on things and maybe not having a grasp on it, because that's not good. So,
absolutely.
This is fine.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say thank you to all of you guys for coming here and having this conversation, sharing your thoughts, your ideas, asking your questions. I think that's what part of the Marana-Cook area schools are all about, is that having that discussion as a community. So thank you guys for being here. It means a lot that you're here.
Sean, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I mean, if we're going to have this talk of consolidation, I'm not opposed to consolidation, but we're going to need all of your help to sell this to your communities, because we just put on an agenda, a letter, and the phone started ringing off the hook that, oh, you're going to close my kid's school. So we're going to need everybody's help to, people don't equate, I've been in other communities where they tried to close schools, and people don't equate to the higher taxes because there's more schools. So we're gonna need all of, if that's something you folks are interested in, we're gonna need your help to sell that. That can't just be on us. Your town meetings, your selectmen meetings, that's something you're really interested in. We're gonna need your help. Because you wanna pack this room, say you're gonna close schools.
Can I just speak to that? I gladly will help you on that and arrange public meetings in Wayne. One of the things, though, that I'm really insistent upon, though, is since Wayne is the smallest of schools and it's always been seen as the one that should get closed, is that what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander. So if you're talking about closing schools, I would be opposed if you just decided to close 1 or 2 of them. I would be more supportive of closing all of them and building a new school. So.
Well, I think, Sean, to your point, which is excellent, I think it's maybe something Kathy said earlier, somebody over there said, maybe it was Betty. Any sort of school consolidation doesn't happen in a short period of time. And so the people who are gonna call and say, don't close the school where my kids are, your kids won't be there when this takes place. This is a future thing. And community members need to think about that. I mean, I'm sure we have some short-term people who come into our towns and then they stay for a few years and then they move on to another town. And so I think you want to appeal primarily to the people who have been here a long time and people who are committed to staying here a long time and looking at the big picture of what makes sense and how that affects everybody. And if having a central school is too much busing, then it's too much busing, and then you decide what you're going to do as an alternative to that. And if it's not seen as too much, and I think that's the big key for people, and so you're right, we need to work together to sell this and make sure that you do it with the timetable. Because people don't need to call and say, oh, you're gonna close my school next year, because it can't happen like that.
No, and I understand that. I mean, there's a report from 2011 that sat there and it got voted down. So
Right.
that conversation started 10 years ago.
Right,
It's not something that no one's thought of. That's what I want to be clear.
exactly.
Any more board comments?
Just one quick one. So we heard a 5% number thrown around. That was thrown around amongst this group as well at our last meeting. Is that something that the other towns would live with?
Well, I'd rather it was 2.
Yeah, I mean, I would never, I would never.
If you look at the realities of this budget, though, if you look at the realities of, I mean, seriously, without going into opportunities for efficiencies, Laura was speaking to, the reality is at least $1 million increase. You cut all the extra little things here or there, it's gonna be hard to do any less than $1 million. So I just think we all need to keep that as a base. I know, right? I mean, but we need to keep that as a base. I mean, that's what you can expect as a community. It is, it's a mill. You know, as a former selectman for 10 years, I totally get it. But
Because the $100 or $150 increase in Mount Vernon just for the bond is like 10% of some of our residents' tax bill. So people are already hyperventilating over that. I can't imagine what people are gonna say when they see this. That's true, yes, even more than that.
5% is 900. Yep. Well, they grabbed it, is $900,000. So, you know, the number sounds like it was last year, but that's $900,000.
I think we're back to about 2.
Boy, Jay's sweating, because he's gonna figure out a way to sell that to all these staff.
That's what you gotta do. If you're gonna go 5, you gotta sell it, because you gotta get it passed.
You know, one of the things we mentioned last week was just this vision that sits in front of us, and I'm gonna beat the dead horse, because I believe in it, but we've created a mission and vision for the school, and, boy, it's hard to support some of these dynamics it's easy to support some of these dynamics under the vision we've created, right? And so it becomes less about vision as we kind of move forward for Jay, and more about what, the need versus the want. And so this is a tough one. It's a crux here, I think, when you think about budget at this point, because 2% is going to make a lot of people unhappy within the school. And so that's going to be something we're going to have to be really mindful of as we move forward with this.
We want to make you happy for a number of years. I think that's the real message here, and I would be, I'm actually.
It started in 2011 when Manchester was probably the most vocal when they said no, we want nothing to do with any consolidation. I mean, it was pretty clear as a selectman at that time that was a reality. And I doubt it's changed in the last just having kids in elementary and middle school at this point, I highly doubt that that's going to be something that will be well received, even if it's the right choice. So, yeah, it's a conversation we have to start, and it's something that we're all going to have to get on the same page with. It's a big one.
Well, there's no need to consolidate if you're doing it for cost savings, if people are fine with keeping their schools open and paying more. But
Absolutely.
they have to understand then that the school budget will be going up by X amount on an annual basis to keep things at the status quo.
And I think that number's 9%.
And so I think we
I
have
hate
to
to say
be,
it, but-
I think you gotta put that out to people, you know,
Yeah,
so.
right. We have to laugh, but I think that number is, I mean, I think last year's aberration was 5%. I think 9% is reality, if we're gonna keep all four schools. Just looking at the pure numbers, I mean, it's scary.
Well, if you're looking at 4 to 496 over the next 3 years, 434 to 496,000 more just for capital
Right.
costs.
Right.
If you're negotiating, you're probably negotiating a multi-year contract with all of your different employee groups. Can probably come up with a pretty good idea of what the next 2 to 3 years are gonna look like. Maybe that's a good approach to put out with your budget. Okay, we've just negotiated 3-year contracts, we have an idea of what this bond is, we have this sheet that tells us, you know, capital needs and other needs, and so we're looking at X over the next 2 years, over the next 3 years, this is what you can expect. We're not looking for 2 million next year, you know, if we take $1 million this year, we're looking at $1 million next year. Maybe that's more comforting, I don't think so, but it might be.
But yeah, I mean, that's the argument we're gonna have to start making pretty quick.
Because the unknown is much scarier than the known.
So the known that we do know is that Oak Point projected 42 mil for 20 years. When you subtract out the 5.8, it comes out to 36.2 that's left, which is approximately 1.8 per year. Just to.
Yeah, I want to make sure
I
that,
think that Oak Point is high. I don't think it's going to be that high because of, some of that can go out to Efficiency Maine and other things that we'll do. That's going to come up shortly.
yeah, I do want to hear, I do want the board to hear that I have heard, at least in conversations that I've had, that there is an appetite for looking at a pathway to some sort of consolidation. I mean, people do realize and understand that. Again, I don't recommend a particular plan. I think, you know, a well-thought-out plan that shows the diligence and shows that it's fair to every single community. That's very important because they're our partners and so forth. We're all partners together in this. But I think there is an appetite in that. Now, I think some of that appetite has been developed by the mill rate. So that's why I think bringing that vision along with, and I understand, again, it's going to take an investment of some time, with your subsequent year plans is really important. How are we going to get there? I mean, when we talk about the 2011, it's sort of like almost a missed opportunity because we would be 35% on the way to someplace right now, you know.
Any citizen comments?
So I just have one thing, Gary, I wanted to say that I think, I really appreciate everything that you've all said, and I think at this point for us as a board, it's really our responsibility right now to look at this as a district. It's a district issue, we have to think about it that way, and we really need to look at the resources we currently have within the district and see, and I've said this before and I've been saying this all along, see what resources we have and see how we can use the resources that we have to meet the needs that we have in front of us. Now, and really in thinking about equity across all of the schools. Because when I'm looking at new teachers in Manchester or Reedfield or wherever, I mean, that's great. Those class sizes are going to be smaller. But I'm also looking at a class size of 22 kindergartens coming into Mount Vernon with one teacher, and Reedfield's going to have, Manchester, in my numbers, show that their kindergarten class is going to have 2 teachers for 17 kids. We have a lot of resources in this district that we as a board really need to look at with the administrative team to see how we may need to move teachers around. We may need to look at things differently rather than just continue to add. We're going to add more teachers, going to add more teachers, going to add more staff. To me, that's not always the right way to fix the problem because we do have a lot of resources that we could use.
On your point, what we have is 133 teachers in this district for 1182 kids, which is around 9 to 1. When you look over the big picture, a lot of schools run that low because of where the kids are located is what causes that. But we do need to have the big question. Jay has to look at it. I talked to him about it. Utilization of our current staff. And where are they? Are they really being utilized?
Well, and that's, you know, again, I remember chairing the Reed Field School Board, and it would just bug me to no end that, and actually Betty was my principal at that time. We would have 1.5 fifth grades, and there'd be a half a fifth grade sitting over at Wayne, and it would sort of be, and you have to staff inefficiently for that.
That's right. That's right.
And there's no choice. And I'm sure in this district, the way we're constructed now, that you have itinerant travel, that's part of the consideration and all that stuff, and that's offering you some lost opportunity.
So for next year, maybe we need to look, you know, there's lots of different things that we can look at. I mean, do we need to make the lines of where kids go to school a little bit fuzzier? So that, you know, okay, I live in Mount Vernon, but actually I live closer to Reedfield, or I live closer, you know, there's lots of different things that we can look at with what we have now to help with this budget for next year, in my opinion.
And I would like to say to the administrators, what are you willing to give up in order to get the things that you want as well? Because we do need to look at cutting this budget. So what are you willing to give up in order to get the things that you want?
So.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So I do have an administrative team meeting tomorrow, and I'd like to be able to continue to, they already know. They're like, yeah, we know we're talking about budget. But I'd like to be surprised. Yeah. I would like, if at all possible, I know I've given the board some stuff here, but I do think we do need a little bit more direction in terms of what work needs to be done, if it's cuts or other things like that. That you guys are suggesting. So before we leave this, I do need something to
So
be
the
able to.
number one item is to look at the amount of personnel versus, to see if that could be impacted on this
Yep.
increase here.
So-
Go ahead, Betty.
Respectfully, is our portion of the agenda done with? Because you've asked for citizen
We
comments. so
can release you.
That's
We hate to
that's
have you
what I'm
leave.
asking.
You are of
Good
course
guess.
welcome. You are of course welcome to stay, but you don't have to
And
stay.
that's exactly what we say at our select board.
Thank you
Thank
again.
you very much for coming.
Thank you.
But he did, yeah.
Go ahead.
Manchester and Reedfield principals.
Manchester and Reedfield principals.
Reedfield principals. I would like to see a class configuration for next year with and without the new teacher positions.
Yep.
Right.
Right, we know that.
Oh.
Right.
Abby, actually, Abby stayed there. What I'm going to do is just write these things down at this point, and we will discuss them as a team tomorrow so we can bring that back, because I think that's a good directive that Betty's giving us at this point, and we don't have to have that conversation here. So, but I agree that that's kind of the stuff that I'm looking for to bring back to you guys for tomorrow. So, thank you.
Any other comments?
I think we heard some direction around 5%, right? So whatever that,
I don't think 5%.
that's so painful. I mean, it's so painful, but
It's too high.
I'm not sure that
I
I
think you're
heard
gonna
that.
have to go
I
below.
think 5% is too high. I think it's too high.
that would be interesting. Or 5 and 4, to be honest.
So,
That's gotta be very,
I want to see half.
I hate throwing numbers, but.
I want to see half. I'm not joking.
So that would be around 4. Okay.
so
I think it's ridiculous, like, I mean, I've gone through and just like made X's all over what I would pay for.
Somebody
Go ahead,
over there
Sean.
had their hand up.
okay. So if I'm reading this, can kind of walk us through this, what this equals, if you cut all these things, and maybe I can do my own math, but, so, all these projects on here equal, the maintenance projects equal 325,000, what's going on here? Can you
So that's a great question, Sean. So I asked the administrators to look at, and my directors to look at, what are level 1 things that they really want to keep.
For this year.
For this, going into this year. And then 2 is, if push comes to shove, I could let them go. And the level 3 was things that I can let go, moving
For 2
forward.
years.
I feel like I can let those go and it's not a big deal. But then again, like what was in yellow, would you bring that forward another year, is what I had asked them to do. So when I sat with like Sean, for example, all those level 1 things are things he'd like to keep in the budget. That doesn't mean they'll all stay there, but that's what he's asking for at this point. So same with like the level 1 at the top, which is pretty much all personnel. Those were all things that the administrators were really looking to keep in the budget. And it's at their recommendation at this point because I want it to be a collaborative approach to that. So having those hard conversations, and I think like Betty's question is a great one. Could you configure your grades a different way? Is there a possibility of configuring grades in a different way so that we don't have to hire another teacher, for example, in Reedfield or Manchester? So, does that make sense, Sean? Did I answer?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I just totaled those out, so I just did
Okay,
the
so if you
spreadsheet
flip it
stuff.
over, this column, okay, gotcha.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead, Alex.
Do you want to go first? No, me?
No, I was just going to say that I think we heard pretty loud and clear from the select people that this, we're going to have a struggle with getting this budget passed. My concern is that if we're looking at 5 or even 4% interest and it doesn't pass, we're going to be sitting right back here again. Now we're going to try to, that's not something we want to do. So I think we really need to think about what they said and really look hard at this as much as it hurts, and I know it does, but I think we really are at the breaking point, and we need to, I even think 4% is too much.
I think it's too high, but I thought it was ridiculous. But
Because I'm just afraid that it's not going to pass, and then what do we do?
especially Mount Vernon, a town that did not pass the bond.
Exactly.
And we go and ask them for more money. No way, I can say, no way.
Yeah.
Bridget, I have a question for you. To negotiate in good faith, how much increase do we need?
I can't see that here.
So, but like if we say 1%,
That is
No,
not
that,
concession.
that.
no, we can't
yeah.
say that, okay, so,
I'll say it that way, Alex, if we were to put a number forward or even a percent forward, that could be looked at as we're not negotiating in good
Okay.
faith, so.
I'm just
so
trying to see
we're-
what our
yeah.
minimum we'd have
We're
to
not
have.
trying to be mysterious, just so
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
no,
we
I
just-
understand.
We're on a slope there, and we just want to make sure
Okay.
we're doing it in good faith, so.
Right,
And we're just getting to salary.
okay.
So,
But
I
it's-
guess that would be, something to be mindful of, that we're still negotiating our contract. So if we go below too much, it hurts our negotiations. So we have to find a happy middle ground.
Jake, can I ask a clarifying question real quick on the fire panel block? And I missed this meeting, so
Yep.
you probably answered this question already, but it's about $27,000 worth of stuff. Those are all like second or third years of those fire panels, so they aren't part of the budget that's carrying.
A lot of those, there's, the fire panel boxes are things that Oak Point recommends for us.
Right.
And Sean had already started that process earlier on. So he's just trying to kind of finish them up.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't figure that number would have been built in, you know what I mean? Why is it an addition? You would have.
Yeah. We didn't
planned for it.
put those
You had
in the
planned
bond.
for it.
No, that's a good question.
You
We
know what
didn't
I'm
put
saying?
it in the bond,
Yeah,
right?
that's all.
It was just, Sean
Those
looked
are
at it
safety
as doing
issues.
it as part of
Absolutely,
his
you don't
regular
want to mess with
budget.
safety, absolutely, I just, as an add-on, it seems
Yeah.
like if we would have paid for it in 2018, it would have, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
That's all. Because short of that number, you know, when you look at the roof, I think that's the big one that the selectmen are frustrated with. I mean, just because we just did the bond and then asked for the roof is.
That's not the, it's only the
It's just the fixing.
seam,
right? Just
right, the
seam work.
repair. It's maintenance items.
It's
The bond was
it's the selling.
strictly new items.
Right, right. We just gotta sell that. I mean,
Right.
because it's the big ticket.
I also heard a lot of hesitation about the resource officer as well. So I think that might be something we want to talk further about.
Go ahead, Patty.
My question is, because I'm not proposing anything, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around how much everything is. So if, for example, we just took these number one priority items, what percent, and we didn't do any of the 2s or 3s, and I am not suggesting that. I just can't, when people are saying we're gonna really have to, you know, look hard, I just don't know what like total percent would that end us up with? What would we end up with? Does that make sense? Or is that?
Okay, we're gonna do some calculations
Okay.
real quick.
Did you add these two together? Yeah.
Rounding.
If you just do the tier ones, the way Alex's numbers look, and I think they're consistent with what I was doing before, that's looking at that's about a 4%. And that's not with health insurance
And right.
increases and all that other stuff. Just this alone, just these two lines is 4%.
But that's all before looking at restructuring teachers.
Correct. And it also does not include a couple of other lines. It
Right,
doesn't
the
include-
debt.
Yeah.
The debt.
Yeah, so it includes some other stuff.
Yeah, like the 90,000 for that.
Like leases, oil, books,
Yeah.
buses, the bond, and institutional technology. None of that stuff is in there. That all gets it up to about 6%. And that's still not including the benefits. So the benefits is what, about 3%? Must be. If we think about just all the increases, I don't want to go into the whole negotiation on that. If we just kind of put the numbers, everybody's going to be able to.
It kind of all is pointing
It all-
to restructuring.
It does. But that's not going to happen.
No one's gonna.
We're giving Bridget time to calculate. I'm not gonna pretend to think I can work as quick as she can.
How about the equipment for the,
I got you.
It's 6.4%. If 2s and 3s were cut, it would be 6.4.
I think you need to look at the top.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna have to look at some numbers.
I have another
So
question.
what happened to the,
Oh, Gary.
I have another question. Is there a way to look at what, I can't remember which person said, with the district-wide line? I think Bruce did, being this, what,
There's a lot of things in district-wide.
yeah.
All of transportation is in district-wide. District-wide maintenance is in there. The curriculum is all in there. You know, debt service is in there. So there's a lot of things in district-wide. So, but I can drill down to it and to show you where the increases are. I mean, I can't do it right now,
No.
but.
Are we at the point, too, where we should think about things that have already, and I don't even know if this is possible, been put into the budget previously? Like open positions that are not currently filled and just not filling them? Can we do that? Is that more or less important or a priority than
Yeah, well,
some of the things on here?
And I think that's part of Betty's questions also. I know she kind of looked at it directly at Manchester and Reedfield, but I think we do have to look at that, you know, going into the middle school and high schools also. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking just about like the literacy and math coach positions that are open, and I'm sure there are other, and I'm not making any proposals or suggestions, I'm just imagining open positions that have already been approved. Do we need to look at all that?
Oh, like
You know,
taking
like,
back some positions.
we haven't had that, for example, for a year. Do we want to, is that, what's more important? How do we do this?
So we added a whole bunch of, before you came, Patty, math and English interventionists, because of the grades. But the grades were poor this year, as far as I'm concerned, for the middle school. I think that's what I saw. But the grades have not been reported this year like they have in the past.
Yeah.
Wait, Gary,
And
though,
that's not the way to go.
I have no questions about the need for
Right.
interventionists or coaches, I get it. I'm
Right.
just wondering more generally, that was maybe a terrible example to use, it was just the only one that came to mind, of if there are unfilled open positions, do we need to consider that as we're considering the things that have been proposed? That's all.
How many unfilled positions do we have now?
Unfilled at this right now.
Just a rough number.
So we have the literacy and math coach, and then we do have a couple of resignations that are coming through. This is kind of hiring season, so
Yeah.
we'll see some movement, but we have had a couple of resignations come through already, so.
But like teacher or interventionist or both?
Teacher at this point,
Okay.
yeah. So I don't know that number. Oh, sorry, Caleb.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Is it unrealistic to move the $37,000 worth of painting to like year 2 or 3? I mean, I don't,
Move the painting.
it's like $5,000 per.
I can certainly talk with Sean about that. That's who
I
I
mean,
would talk to
I'm just
about, yeah.
like,
So the only problem he has with painting is in Wayne, we have mold on the outside of the building.
okay, is that $5,000 worth of paint? Or actually, that's $7,000 for Wayne.
No, he's gonna have to replace the fascia boards,
He's looking at,
as far as I'm concerned, clean out those gutters.
so maybe not all $37,000, but
No,
some
right,
of it.
some of it
could
can
be
go.
pushed out. I mean, obviously, we want the place to look.
Yeah, so Caleb, I'm writing those things down so I can have those conversations, because that's what I'm looking for, so.
But this is coming back, right? You got that in
I
your
can't.
key
that's right, I can
list?
move it. Yeah, I can move it in.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I wrote that down. Yes, I got that.
Okay, go ahead.
If you go back to the bleachers, is there a way, do we need to replace all of them at one time, as was suggested, do it in phases?
The bleachers are gonna have to be engineered because of the support roofs. There's a beam that comes out that supports, so the bleachers actually have to be engineered to fit in around those beams. My recommendation is if you're gonna do it, just do it at one time and be done with it. We did talk about the possibility of doing a lease purchase and spreading it out over 5 years. So rather than paying $100,000 in year 1, we could do $20,000 over 5 years. You know, that's a way to kind of, you're still paying for it, but you're spreading it out a little bit more. So that's a possibility for sure.
Is there opportunities in this budget to pay for some things with grant monies that potentially the bleachers or other areas here? Is that part of, has that been explored?
The only kind of grant money we get is we couldn't use it on equipment or physical things. A lot of it has to go directly to students and working with students. So that's hard to do. We could potentially go look for something else.
Not existing grant money that you
Right.
get, just outside sort of foundation grants that are available to schools.
Yeah. We haven't done that, but we certainly could look into that.
Yeah, I too like that idea, Crystal. You know, see if we could get, maybe the Alphons want to pay for some bleachers.
Go ahead, Caleb.
So on that same exact note, how unrealistic would it be to look at sponsorship from businesses around, or family, or organizations around. I mean, $105,000 is a lot of money. Granted, we need bleachers, but, I mean,
Well, and I guess just a heads up, it's going to be coming in a couple of meetings here, but ABS has, or excuse me, the Awesome Bear Society is looking at doing some things for the outside athletic facilities. So we have to be careful that we don't get into competing things, because they definitely have a vision of what they'd like to do, and they will be here to present. They're going to be presenting to the Facilities Committee next week, and then from there, they'll be bringing it forward to the board, so.
but they also want bleachers, right?
Yeah.
So,
They, yeah.
They don't want to pay for it.
Right.
so that's,
Yes, they're one group that definitely is, yeah.
So one more thing, Jay, I would ask, I think I need more clarification on the need for the behavioral program at the high school. And if there's any possible way to consolidate the middle school and high school behavioral programs, and just look at if there's something that we can do differently there.
Sure. Yeah, so Kathy, that's, I will bring that back,
Yep,
and
that's-
Ryan and
yep.
I will have a talk, and we'll bring that back.
That's why I
How's
asked you
that
to just write it down so you can do
I
that.
got it.
Brief note on the bleachers, the ABS spoke for them, but I don't see it as them asking for it. I think the points that were made to us was one senior falling off those bleachers is going to be a liability issue that will pay for them 3 or 4 times over. So we may not be able to do them right away, or we may need to do at least purchase, but we need to be aware of safety.
On that note, it would be nice to just have an idea of what these line items for safety, the safety issues.
Okay, yep.
Moving on.
I move to approve the minutes of March 6th, 2019.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Patty, did you vote? Did you vote? Patty? Okay, sorry, I just didn't see it, just making sure, I apologize.
Yeah, everybody did.
Okay, sounds good.
So, I move to consider the 2019-2020 school calendar.
Second.
Any discussion on the?
Yes, I have a question.
Go
Before
ahead.
you go for the vote.
So do I.
I'm wondering if there's been any evaluation or assessment done on the high school late starts? Like, have they been valuable? Has the time been? I'd just like to know what the, if it's been.
So I had a conversation with Dr. Conway about that, and he did feel like there's some important work that's happening, but he has heard from a lot from the teachers that they feel like they're losing instructional time. So that's one of the reasons why I moved it back to just 1 a month versus having several a month.
So is there any data available about the benefits of that time?
I don't have that at this time, no, but I can.
Is there a
ask
plan
him.
to do any kind of evaluation of that?
We can certainly move that forward. I think that's what you're asking,
I
right?
think so.
Okay.
And if, how have they been used this year? Have the late starts accomplished what it was intended to do?
So that means we should table it.
I would like to table it
Yeah, that's
until
what
we
I'm
have
thinking.
answers.
That's what I
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So I make a
Wait,
motion.
I have one more question. And this is an easy question for somebody to answer. On those first 2 days in August, is one of those days still for advisor training?
Yes.
Okay.
I would move that we table the calendar until we get answers to these questions.
Second? Another question?
Okay.
Can you also possibly, it's either a question or a comment, I don't really know yet, but maybe look at, like, what it would look like if we had take it how you want, but a spring break versus having like it seems like from December on, we have a vacation every other month. And we live in Maine, so we have a really short summer.
One of the things that, and that's a good question, Caleb. One of the things that we have to be aware of is that we participate with the Capital Area Technical Center, and by law, we can only be off 5 days. And this calendar has been built with the sending schools plus the Augusta school system, and right now, we're at our 5-day maximum, I guess is the way I would say that. So moving a vacation would throw us way out of whack, and then we wouldn't be compliant with the law, so.
Got it.
Yeah. But that's a great question.
Summers are so short.
No, I think there was, I think Coney was looking into extending their school calendar by like 5 days.
No.
No?
No, I haven't heard that, no.
Okay.
No. I know RSU 2 did do a modification, but it stayed within it was 2 days, and it was after the January 1st holiday. They decided to go Thursday, Friday. Their board voted to go Thursday, Friday, but it still kept the calendar within the 5-day limit, even though RSU 2, I don't know if that's what you had heard, Alex, or.
That could have
or
been
not.
it, too.
Yeah.
So the other thing with the calendar, you need to, Diane was going to present. You have yet to do that.
Present the.
Use
Oh,
of the
remote
computers.
for- Yes, yep, and that is coming, we're just trying to.
No, I just want it done now. I think it's a fantastic idea.
So Jay, just one more thing on the late
No,
start.
you're good.
I would ask that you would just look at the one that's in November. November's a month that is so broken up and so much time is lost already. I just would ask that you would maybe consider looking at that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I will get with Dr. Conway as soon as possible and try to have those answers back to you guys.
Thank you.
All in favor of tabling?
Was there a second?
Was there?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a
Yes.
second.
Okay.
We can-
So it was unanimous to table.
Unanimous.
Was it unanimous?
Yes.
I'll abstain.
Oh, Alex did abstain, sorry.
What's that for?
Well, I mean, CATSI-wise, I just know that we have to get this done soon
Yeah.
to be in compliance with CATSI.
Yep.
So I
It's
just,
going to be done next meeting.
I can't vote.
Jay's going to get on the ball.
I don't want to vote against it, so.
We'll bring it back, I can get that data for sure.
Adjourned.